Well, good evening and welcome everybody to the East Gippsland Shire Council's meeting of Tuesday the 27th of August 2024. The East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting. These recordings are available for viewing by the public by following the link on Council's website. During the meeting, any members of the public who are addressing the Council will have their images and comments recorded. No other person has the right to record council meetings unless approval has been granted by the Chair. In line with the Local Government Act 2020, councillors are able to attend council meetings electronically or in person, and the meetings will be made public via live streaming. If technical difficulties are experienced with the live streaming during the meeting, we may adjourn until the issue is resolved. If technical issues cannot be resolved, the meeting may be postponed to a later time or date. The East Gippsland Shire acknowledges the Gunai, Kurnai, Monero and Bidwell people as the traditional owners of this land that encompasses East Gippsland Shire and their enduring relationship with country. The traditional owners have cared for and nurtured East Gippsland for tens of thousands of years. Council value their living culture and practices and their right to self-determination. Council pays respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living in East Gippsland, their elders past, present and emerging. A member's attendance can only be recorded as present at a council meeting when the member can confirm that they meet all of the following criteria. Firstly, that they can hear proceedings and be heard by other members in attendance. And secondly, that they can see members in attendance and be seen by other members. I'll now confirm with each of the councillors attending online in turn that they can see, hear and be heard by each other, and note assurance from each that the location they are participating from this evening is secure to ensure that confidential deliberations remain confidential. Councillor Van Diggle, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can, Mayor.
Thank you. And can you assure us that the location you're participating from this evening is secure?
Yes, it is, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Van Diggle. Councillor Reeves, can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can, Mayor.
Thank you. And is the location you're participating from secure?
It certainly is.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Agenda item number 1.2 is apologies. I don't believe there are any apologies for this evening, CEO.
No, Mayor, we have no apologies.
Thank you. 1.3 is declarations of conflict of interest. Councillors, are there any declarations to be made in relation to matters for consideration this evening? Councillor Stowe?
Yes, item 5.1.2.
Thank you. And Ms Johnson?
Item 7.1.
Thank you. And Councillor Van Diggle?
I also have a conflict at 7.1.
Thank you. Councillors, if there are no further conflicts of interest declarations to make, we will move on to agenda item 1.4, which is the confirmation of the minutes from our previous meeting. Councillors, you have had an opportunity to read them. Could I have a motion, please, to confirm that they are an accurate reflection of that meeting? Thank you, Councillor Stowe. And a seconder, Councillor Uri. Councillor Stowe, would you like to speak to that motion? No, thank you. Councillor Uri, is that motion opposed? Anybody else like to speak to that motion? I will put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Agenda item 1.5 is the next meeting of the Shire Council, and our next meeting is scheduled to occur on Tuesday the 10th of September 2024 at the Corporate Centre here at 27 Main Street, Bairnsdale, and that meeting will commence at 6 o'clock. Agenda item 1.7 is the open forum, and our first agenda item there at 1.7.1 is petitions. Ms Weigel, do we have any petitions this evening?
If we may, we'll just go back to the request for leave of absence.
Yes, I might have missed that, did I? My apologies.
We have no request for leave of absence, Mayor.
Yes, very good. No request for leaves of absence at 1.6. We do, however, have a junior Rotarian with us this evening. We have Tarkin Richardson from St Mary's Primary School. Tarkin, we have a token of our appreciation for your efforts that I'll just come and give you now. Okay, now we will move on to 1.7, which is open forum. The first item in open forum is 1.7.1, which is petitions. Ms Weigel, do we have petitions this evening?
We have no petitions, Mayor.
Thank you. And 1.7.2 is questions of council. Ms Weigel, are there questions of council this evening? I understand there are some.
We have a number of questions of council this evening. The first question is from Joanne Pietriatoni. I think, Joanne, you're in the gallery, but you wanted me to read the question. Is that right? So the preamble to this question is the Lockhart Terrace Playground, which opened to public on Friday the 2nd of August 2024, is of concern to me as my family home is directly opposite it, with only a street tree frontage separating the two. And the question is, with no community consultation, engagement or feasibility study undertaken, nor any strategy, policy or guidelines in place, could Council please explain how and when it will work with me in handling the following items, as some of them are now becoming an issue. And there are a number of items listed, which I will read. Number one is privacy. People staring or giving off comments to my family and I when in the front yard. Number two, increased congregation in the mornings and evenings. 3, increased noise on weekends. 4, increased parking. 5, increased traffic. 6, mulch being blown onto the street and my property. 7 is maintenance and upkeep. 8 is alcohol and drugs. And 9 is graffiti and vandalism. Mayor, through you, I will ask our General Manager of Assets and Environment to respond to the question.
Thank you, Ms Weigel. Thank you, Mr McConnell.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. The Lockhart Terrace Playground is currently being developed by the developer of the residential subdivision in that area, rather than by council. So this is a normal process as part of subdivision and residential development that a local reserve will be set aside and that there would be requirements in terms of development of that for use by local community. So in this case, the playground was a condition of the planning approval for the subdivision, which originally dates back to 2011, when the first subdivision approval was provided for that area. And whilst the approval was amended during the 2021-22 year, this condition in relation to a playground being required was unchanged. And so the playground forms part of what we understand as stage 2 of that subdivision. So at the time the requirements for that playground were set, in fact, it's challenging to undertake any community consultation in relation to that playground because, in fact, the community is not there yet because we're in the process of developing a new residential area, or the developer is in that process. And so it is very normal and a fairly standard part of our process that there's a requirement to set aside some area for reserves and for these local reserves and playgrounds to be developed. And the design of the playground is broadly consistent with the expectations for what is a local, understood as a local playground. And typically, for example, a local playground doesn't require dedicated parking because it's intended to service the local members of that community that are there within that walking distance of the playground. When the playground is fully completed and we've assessed it as meeting the requirements of that planning approval, the playground will be transferred to council and it will be part of council's assets, and council will then be responsible for its ongoing management. So whether it be matters associated with mulch, whether it be matters associated with graffiti and its general maintenance and safety, those things will come to council as is normally the process. I do note that council's also received some really positive feedback about the playground from local children in the area. So I note that for councillors and information as well. Some of the impacts that have been identified in terms of people gathering at the location is in fact the things you would expect in a local reserve and local playground. But some of the things that have been reported, if they reach that threshold of being a bit antisocial or illegal, then we will work with the local police to seek resolution of those issues as we would with any other playground or public open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McConnell, and thank you for the question. Our next question is from Kim Wilson, and CEO, I understand you're going to read that question.
That's right. Kim's not here with us and has asked that I read it. It is a two-part question. The first part of the question is, considering the recent 2020 bushfires impact on our forests and wildlife and the council capacity, how does council plan to monitor and ensure that the logging operations adhere to the approved logging plan, both during and after operations? What specific processes are in place to guarantee compliance? I think I'll ask our General Manager of Place and Community to respond to this part of the question, and then we will read the second part. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. The recommendation includes a proposed condition of approval to require an independent compliance monitoring report in 6 monthly intervals, providing details of compliance with all conditions of the permit and all requirements of the property vegetation plan. If considered necessary, Council may also obtain additional expert advice to review the compliance monitoring reports.
And thank you. And the second part of that question from Ms Wilson is, given that the Council's forestry position paper supports selective logging and biodiversity conservation, how does the Council reconcile this with the current logging permit application, which seems to align with outdated, high-volume, low-value practices? Additionally, with no requirement for loggers to purchase offsets, how will the Council ensure that the claimed regeneration is effectively enforced, especially considering the known failures in past regeneration efforts? And again, I'll ask our General Manager of Place and Community to respond.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor. As outlined in the property vegetation plan, harvesting is planned to be conducted in accordance with retention harvesting regime. Retention harvesting is designed for areas with high levels of existing and emerging habitat trees. Application of a retention harvesting regime to this planned harvesting operation ensures older forest elements are retained within areas identified for timber harvesting and are linked to riparian vegetation to provide habitat connectivity and ecological processes. The property vegetation plan also indicates an assessment of seedbed receptivity and bushfire risk will be undertaken on completion of harvesting of any single coup. Where harvesting residues are deemed to be too high to provide an adequately receptive seedbed, low intensity prescribed regeneration burning may be conducted in accordance with legal prescriptions. The landholder will seek advice from a suitably qualified and experienced forester to determine the need for any type of regenerative burn prescription if needed. The conditions of the approval proposed by DECA also include a requirement that regeneration reports must be submitted to the responsible authority at intervals and in accordance with the amended property vegetation plan.
Thank you, Mr Stevenson. Our next question is from Ms Jill Redwood. Do we have Jill online with us?
We do. We will just let her in, Mayor.
Welcome to the chamber, Jill. Can you hear and see us okay?
I can hear and see you. Hear me okay?
You're a little broken up, so I just suggest that maybe we leave your camera off at this stage. But if you'd like to proceed with your question, we'll hope that we can hear that. And if not, I'll let you know.
Okay. Is that any better?
Yes, it is. Please go ahead.
Great. Thanks for this. I have a question. It's in relation, two questions in relation to the current application for approved logging on private land, as per the last question. I'd like to pose a general overarching question first regarding Council's responsibility on this matter. Now, logging is a fairly complex area, and both legally and operationally, And we realise that local governments right across Victoria, not just East Gippsland, have been loaded with this responsibility of assessing, overseeing, regulating private land logging, but without proper resourcing or expertise in most instances. So, as the responsible authority, does Council have any concerns about its lack of capacity to regulate private land logging through to the regeneration phase, and also does it have the capacity to also detect, investigate, take action against illegal logging that's going on and the clearing of private land across the Shire? That's question 1.
Thank you, Jill. We'll see if we can get an answer from our General Manager on that one for you.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mayor. The recommendation includes a proposed condition of approval to require an independent compliance monitoring report in 6 monthly intervals, providing details of compliance with all conditions of the permit and all requirements of the property vegetation plan. If considered necessary, Council may also obtain additional expert advice to review the compliance of monitoring reports. Council is aware of its resourcing constraints in relation to enforcement, and this is outlined in the officer's report, and for that reason the above condition has been included to place the onus on the proponent to provide compliance monitoring reports. Council investigates complaints of illegal native vegetation removal. It initiates enforcement action where it is practical to do so, and Council's ability to undertake enforcement action is always dependent on the circumstances of each case. The officer's report provides Council with a range of options that they may wish to consider when determining this matter.
Thank you, Jill. And if you'd like to go ahead with the second part of your question.
Yes, thank you. The second question. The applicant claims the type of logging will be variable retention. There is no set definition or silvicultural procedure for this term. I know you sort of explained what it might look like before, but an FOI to both Deaker and Vic Forest this year verified that there was no definition. It showed that there was no silvicultural system that was defined under that term, and despite it being used to describe logging types on many COOP plans, it's seen huge areas clear-felled to dirt under this term of retention. Have councillors or planning department looked into what this might really mean if the term has any legal weight, and if anything does this non-defined logging method, and it's knowingly a non-defined logging method stated in the plan, does it concern Council that it might just mean anything at all and there's no mandatory obligation to adhere to a particular type of silvicultural management?
Thank you, Jill. If we could get a response, officers, please. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mayor. Council officers are aware of various scientific papers and articles on the subject which describe variable retention harvesting, and research articles from Australia and overseas dating back to about 2006 make reference to the term and provide some descriptions of the methods used. While acknowledging the question regarding a precise definition of the term, Council is reliant on the advice of Deaker in relation to the harvesting methods outlined in detail in the property vegetation plan.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for your question this evening, Jill. We will now move on to our next question, which is from Louise Crisp, and I believe Louise is with us this evening. Welcome to the chamber, Louise. Feel free to press the little button there to make the microphone activate and to ask a question when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. My first question is also in relation to the permit application regarding timber harvesting and regeneration on private land at Murrungowar. Question 1. The modernised regional forest agreements will end in December 2024. There will no longer be an exemption of the EPBC Act for native forest logging operations that are planned or occurring on private land in Victoria. From December 2024, logging operations will require a referral under the EPBC Act, where they may have a significant impact on matters of national environmental significance. EPBC listed species recorded on or in the vicinity of the permit application property include greater gliders, yellow-bellied gliders and long-footed potoroo. From December 2024, local governments will need to consider the EPBC Act when exercising their functions. The planning permit application involves a staged process of logging operations. Later stages of the logging, additional coops will commence after December 2024. Has the East Gippsland Shire Council therefore received legal advice regarding their obligations to refer part or all of this permit application under the EPBC Act?
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for your question, and through you, Mayor. Referrals under the EPBC Act are the responsibility of the proponent. I refer to the Australian Government's fact sheet entitled Submitting a Referral under the EPBC Act, a fact sheet for a person proposing to take an action. Council has obtained previous legal advice on another matter that indicates that Council is not prohibited from issuing a planning permit in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act 1987, where approval under some other legislation, including the EPBC Act, may also be required. There is also VCAT precedent where that principle has been confirmed.
Thank you. Question 2, in relation to the same application. The East Gippsland Shire Council position paper, Native Timber Harvesting in East Gippsland, was adopted by the Shire Council in August 2022. The Council's policies supported selective logging, with logs to be used for high value use and end use. If the planning permit application is approved, will Council enforce a single tree selective method as stated in its policy?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks for your question, and through you, Mayor. The position paper does not constitute planning policy as defined in the planning scheme, and that Council is required to consider its obligation as a responsible authority and undertake the assessment of the proposal in accordance with the planning scheme requirements. Council is reliant on the advice of DECA in relation to the harvesting methods outlined.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Ms Crisp. Our next question is from Mr John Hermans, and I understand the CEO. You will read that question.
I will, thank you, Mayor. The preamble to this is Planning Permit Application 5.2023.350.1, Timber Harvesting and Regeneration on Private Land, 959 Murrungowar Road, Cabbage Tree Creek, the East Gippsland Shire Council position paper, Native Timber Harvesting in East Gippsland, was adopted by EGSC in August 2022. We saw that Council developed a considered and fairly progressive policy regarding the type of forest logging it felt should be acceptable on private land. That is selective, and those logs to be used for high value and use. Does Council consider firewood high value? Which is the first question. Well, I will refer again to our General Manager, Place and Community.
Thanks, Mr Stevenson.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. I suppose the best way I can respond to this one is to say legally sourced firewood as a byproduct of timber harvesting could be considered a value-adding product.
Thank you. And second part of the question?
We only had one part to that question, but there is
very good. We have
questions.
next questioner is Blake Nisbet on behalf of the VNPA, and the CEO, I understand you will read that question as well.
That's right, and so this one is the one that has two parts.
Thank you.
So the preamble to this is the proponent has adopted a survey methodology and silviculture approach which was highly criticised in recent Supreme Court rulings. They have found it to be ineffective at protecting resident populations of greater and yellow-bellied gliders from logging, and to be inconsistent with sections 2.2.2.2 and 2.2.2.4 of the Code of Practice for Timber Production. Question 1. Has the Council considered these findings, and are they satisfied that the approval of such operations would be consistent with the section 3.2.2 of the Code and their obligations under the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act 1988. And I will again refer this question to our General Manager, Place and Community.
Thanks, Mr Stevenson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. The recommendation is relying on the advice of DECA, which does include detailed commentary on section 3.2.2 of the Code of Practice for timber production, and this can be referred to in the DECA's referral response. The officer's report provides council with a range of options that they may wish to consider when determining this matter also.
And Mayor, the second and last question we have before us this evening, again from Mr Nesbitt. The question is, if the proposed application is approved by councillors or the Planning Minister in brackets, what considerations and actions will council take in light of new information becoming available? For example, new detections of forest-dependent threatened species on the property, new additions to the FFG Act list of threatened species, key threatening processes or action statements which are relevant to the approved application. Likewise, with new additions to the recovery plans or threatened listings under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999 or any other change in circumstances. And again, I'll refer this question to General Manager, Place and Community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Stevenson. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Well, the question is somewhat hypothetical, but I'll attempt to answer it as follows. If there are changed circumstances in relation to legislative requirements, Council would seek further advice from DECA as to whether there needs to be a change to the property vegetation plan to reflect the changed circumstances. Council may also require legal advice, as there may also be limiting factors relating to retrospective application of any new requirements.
Thank you for the response. Councillors, that brings us to the end of questions of council for this evening and moves us on to agenda item 1.7.3, which is public submissions. I understand we have Mr Warwick Williams in person who has a request to speak.
He does, Mayor, and we would ask Mr Williams to speak just before the item is considered by Council. So we've got a couple more bits of business to get through, and then we'll ask Mr Williams to come forward. Thank you.
My apologies for a false start there, Mr Williams. So we'll now move on to item 1.8, which is items for tabling. I wish to table, in accordance with section 54(5)(b) of the Local Government Act 2020, a copy of the Audit and Risk Committee biannual report, and for that to subsequently be recorded in the minutes of tonight's meeting. Agenda item number 2 is notices of motion, and I believe we do have a notice of motion from the council floor this evening. Yes. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mayor.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mayor, I have a motion before council. However, after careful deliberation and understanding some of the councillors who have suggested additions to the motion, I would like to present an alternate motion.
Very good. Do you have that electronically for councillors to see? You do. Thank
yes,
you very
Mayor.
much.
I'm not sure if I can see it with these long-distance glasses, but I'll give it a crack. That council note the public transparency policy will be reviewed when a new council is established. 2, request that a report is provided to a future meeting of the new council providing A, options to revise the public transparency policy and governance arrangements about how to engage with community at council briefings that continue to be in accordance with the public transparent principles, and public interest and confidentiality definitions of the Local Government Act 2020, and B, information relating to how the Mornington Peninsula Council is implementing their motion and what steps and impediments are currently being revealed in working to open their briefings to the public and how that benefits community, and 3, request that during the induction workshop advice regarding confidentiality in briefings is provided and then a report is presented to the incoming councillors on the importance of risk management, confidentiality, public interest, transparency and accountability being key tenets of good governance and decision-making.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. And councillors, do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor White, thank you. Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak to the motion?
I certainly would.
I thought you might.
So, ladies and gentlemen and esteemed councillors, tonight I was going to say stand, but I actually sit before you with a strong commitment to the principles of transparency and accountability that are the cornerstones of our democratic governance. I propose a motion that embodies these principles and seek to enhance our relationship with the community we serve. This is not just about policy, it's about the very essence of trust and integrity in local governance. Our public transparency policy adopted in 2021 is set for review this October. This is an opportunity, a pivotal moment for us to gift to the incoming councillor group the opportunity to reassess how we handle information and how we engage with our community. I'm advocating for a review that will be a transformative shift towards open and transparent briefings, which I believe is not only a necessity, but crucial for the health of our democracy. Transparency is more than a legal obligation. It is a moral imperative. When we open our briefings to the public, we're not just following the letter of the law, we're embracing the spirit of good governance. Open briefings allow our community to witness the deliberative process firsthand. This visibility fosters trust and demonstrates our commitment to involving them in our decision-making processes. It is testament to our dedication to accountability and to ensuring that our actions are subject to public scrutiny. Let us consider the benefits of transparency. Enhance trust by making our briefings public. We build trust with our community. When people can see our decisions are made, they feel more how they're made. They feel more secure knowing their representatives are working in their best interests. This trust is fundamental to a healthy and engaged community. Prevention of corruption. Openness acts as a deterrent to corruption and undue influence. When our discussions are observed by the public, the likelihood of behind-the-scenes manipulation diminishes. We're not saying that that's happening, but that's what it prevents. We create a level playing field where every stakeholder has access to the same information. We empower the public by providing public access to briefing materials, empowering them to engage more meaningfully. Informed citizens are more likely to participate in discussions, provide valuable feedback and hold us accountable through the democratic processes. Informed decision-makings and open briefings require us to justify our decisions publicly. This not only enhances accountability but also encourages us to act with greater integrity and diligence. It reduces the risk of opaque decision-making and ensures that our actions are transparent and justifiable. I acknowledge that implementing open briefings is not without its challenges. Confidential matters must be protected, and there will be times when privacy is necessary. However, by establishing a framework that prioritises transparency while respecting confidentiality, we can strike a balance that serves both the public interest and the need for privacy. I'm almost done. The success of the Mornington Peninsula Council in opening their briefings to the public provides us with a valuable example. I propose that we study their approach and learn from their experience. This will provide us with actionable insights and strategies to achieve similar success. I also recommend that a workshop be conducted with the incoming councillors to emphasise the importance of transparency and accountability. This workshop will ensure that our successors understand and value these principles as we do and are prepared to continue this important work. Councillors, I'm deeply committed to this cause. I've spoken at length for the last 4 years about this matter. I stood for transparency and accountability. And at each briefing I've objected to the clause that deems the briefings confidential and of a sensitive nature. As we approach the end of this council term, I trust that the incoming council will embrace this new vision and the opportunity that we can give them to champion transparency and make it their first order of business for next term. In conclusion, I ask each one of you to affirm our commitment to openness. Let us be the council that leads by example. that prioritises the public's right to know, and that strengthens our democracy through transparency. I urge you all to support this motion and to endorse a future where our governance is as transparent and as accountable as the community deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillor White, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, I certainly fully support this motion. I'll be quite brief, but we have struggled with community consultation on so many levels for many, many years, and I believe that opening up the briefings will give people who come and wish to listen to what's being discussed and what might be coming forward, give them a first-hand opportunity and give them the chance to be on the front foot with proposals that Council's considering, which is a great way of getting the message out before, as it's happened many times with the consultation technique, it's gone over, it's missed the mark, and it's not until the proposal actually gets to a council meeting that people go, oh, we didn't know about this. I wish we had have, because we would have had input. So I'm proposing that this is one good outcome, but the other side of it is an observation from meetings, briefings. I think it would also bring a better type of debate and behaviour if it's in the public rather than behind closed doors, because sometimes debate can get quite robust. So I would consider that there'd be a much better behaviour from the next group of councillors at times. Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Councillor Uri?
Thank you, Mayor. Can I begin by acknowledging that Councillor Buckley has indeed stood on this matter of transparency, and I encourage and thank her for sticking with this topic and for trying to bring more transparency to this council. And I think that actually has been done in a number of ways. I think there have been changes over the last 4 years that the community will appreciate, and no doubt that will continue. I don't necessarily, there's nothing, now that this motion has been discussed and amended, I don't object to the motion itself, but I'm going to vote against it because I think it won't make any difference to the process. I think the new council will come in, there'll be an induction process. Part of that will be to talk in depth, as happened with us when we were first councillors 4 years ago, about what good governance means, and importantly what good decision making means for councillors. And while I don't profess to have a huge amount of experience, I do have some experience on being on a committee of management of a social enterprise, and also on the hospital board for a number of years, and I can say that good governance was key to what we tried to do at all times, and our meetings certainly weren't open to the public. I think there is an emphasis by Councillor Buckley about corruption and undue influence, and that this, not just the review, but there's also an implication that there is a certain outcome, that the new council will decide to have open briefings. I'm not opposed to them having the discussion and having a review of this policy, but I don't like to have a predetermination. I think it should be completely left up to the new council, and I'm sure the staff will be presenting to them the pros and cons of what open briefings would mean, because ultimately we do want councils making really good decisions. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Greeson, please go ahead.
I thank you, Mayor. Look, I agree with Councillor Uri and everything that Councillor Uri said. I also don't really have any longer a problem with the motion. I was going to recommend that, or to put an alternate motion, that this discussion be deferred. It's an important discussion, and we haven't had the opportunity until about 10 minutes before this meeting, or half an hour before this meeting, to actually have a discussion about it. I think it's a problem making these kinds of incredibly important decisions that without having had the opportunity to thrash it out and look at the details and look at the implications. I think it's a potentially significant change to essentially impose on a new council. I would like to see a new council consider this motion and take it on. Personally, I would like to see regular briefings that are actually open to the community, for the community to come in and discuss the issues that are being put to the councillors with the councillors. That's taking it yet another step. So I'm not going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Reeves, please go ahead.
Look, thank you and good evening, everyone. Councillor Buckley, I just want to thank you for having the conversation and accepting the suggestions in that amendment. I think it strengthens the notice of motion that you put up ahead of us. I think that also the notice of motion reinforces the journey ahead for a new council. It doesn't change a lot, except that it shines a light on the fact that this is something that's important. I think Mornington Peninsula Council are grappling at the moment with the implementation of their motion, and I've watched with interest that particular space, and continue to do so, and I'll continue to watch this particular space in local government Victoria, because I think that 79 councils and only 2 of us at the moment having this important discussion doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. It just means that it is a challenging space. But I again just acknowledge the acceptance of those amendments, because I think a bit like rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. I think that risk management, confidentiality, public interest, transparency, accountability are all good governance qualities and behaviours, and they all exist together. So I'm glad to see the reference there. So I'm happy to support it as it is, but I acknowledge the discussion that's happened.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Buckley, I believe you have right of reply.
Yes, thank you very much. It's interesting that there was the assumption that this was a predetermined outcome. In fact, that's not what the motion is. It's a gift given to the next councillor group that they'll be provided with the information to determine whether they will open the briefings. I would have liked to have opened the briefings to the public whilst in this term, because I think that that's, from my previous statements, the best way forward for community to be able to gain trust in the council and the organisation. So I think this is just a great offer, a gift to the next councillor group. They will be doing an induction process. They'll be getting an extra report, which is what this is asking for, to give them the opportunity to decide what's the best steps for their next council term. So, I'm disappointed to hear Councillor Grecian and Councillor Uri don't support that, but that's their prerogative, and I accept that. But I would hope that the rest of the councillors who have worked with me all through this term would support me on this matter, and I thank Councillor Reeves for his support and his contributions to the amendments to the motion. And I also amended the motion to accommodate Councillor Uri and Councillor Grecian. However, it doesn't seem to have made much of a difference. But thank you, Mayor, and I'd like it to put it to the vote.
That is the point that we're at.
Yes.
So I will indeed put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? And I believe the motion is carried.
Thank you. Well done,
councillors. Item 3 is deferred business. CEO, do we have any deferred business?
No, Mayor, no deferred business.
Item 4 is councillor and delegate reports, and councillors, as previously agreed, I would request that you submit written reports for inclusion in the minutes of this meeting. However, Councillor Buckley, I believe you have something to say about a member of the community who may have passed.
Oh, yes, sorry, one moment. I didn't realise that was coming up. I do apologise. If you could just give me one moment to gather my thoughts on that. Okay. It's a very sad day indeed for the Omeo community. For many years I used to travel on the Omeo bus, and there was a bloke that really made an impact on me on those trips, and his name was Trevor Smith, and he was the Omeo bus driver, and sadly he succumbed to his battle with cancer yesterday. So I'd like to acknowledge that the community held this man in such high regard. He contributed to the Lions Club for many years. I've lost the notes, so I'll just go off the cuff and I'll speak from the heart. He was a bloke that stood by his convictions. He was a bit of a hippie too, you know, but he was very good with his hands. He built his own hut out of his own hands and spent a lot of his life as a very keen angler. And he loved his fishing, he loved his girls and his family, and he'll be really missed by our community. He gave his life and his service to commuting up that very dangerous alpine stretch of road for decades, and so it's with great sorrow that he's passed. And I did go and see him recently, and he's asked me to sing at his funeral, which was a rather unusual ask, but he's asked me to sing I Did It My Way. So I'll put my best efforts towards that, and I'd just like to acknowledge at the East Gippsland Council and the organisation is very sad at his passing. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. And Councillor Stowe, you have something to add there.
Yeah, I'd just like to support what Sonia said. Excuse me, I served in the Army or Citizens Military Forces with Trevor back in 1970.
Wow.
And found him a great bloke then. He continued to be. And he's virtually saved the Omeo bus lines, which was going to be closed down by the government. And I think one of his friends walked to Bairnsdale to help save it. And Trevor was a bit of a legend in the area and a great bloke. So share your sentiments, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stowe.
Thank you, Councillor Stowe. And on behalf of the Council, we offer the condolences to the Smith family. Vale, Mr Smith. Councillors, that brings us to agenda item number 5, which is officer reports. The first report is 5.1.1, which is a planning permit application, and I believe that we do have Mr Warwick Williams here to present. Warwick, if you'd like to come forward and sit at the chair there. Either will do, and we'll afford you 5 minutes to speak. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm here to speak, obviously, about the timber harvesting application at Murrungowar. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the applicant, Mr John McConaughey. The application seeks a permit to harvest and regenerate 51 hectares of native forest on private land north of Cabbage Tree over a period of 3 to 10 years. This property, as with most of the foothill forests of East Gippsland, has been subject to timber harvesting over a period of decades. As noted in the property vegetation plan accompanying the planning application, there is no old growth forest on the land. To be clear, and General Manager's answers have pretty much covered this already, Council is making a decision tonight on an application for a planning permit, and as such, it is required to make that decision in accordance with the East Gippsland planning scheme and not in accordance with various other pieces of law that have been mentioned by the different objectors. With respect to the planning scheme, I note that Council's strategic directions for natural resource management include providing opportunities to add value to agricultural and timber products. That's clause 2.03-4. Strategic directions for economic development include protecting the natural environment whilst utilising timber resources. That's clause 2.03-6. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. Pardon me. With respect to forestry and timber production, the planning scheme has the objective to facilitate the establishment, management and harvesting of plantations and the harvesting of timber from native forests. That's clause 14.01-3S. Finally, the land is in the farming zone. An important purpose of the farming zone is to encourage the use and development of land based on comprehensive and sustainable land management practices and infrastructure provision. That's 35.07. We need to consider that the planning scheme does provide a pathway for the granting of permits for the harvesting of native forest on private land, that the state government has provided separate chapters of the Code of Practice for Timber Production for state forest and for private land, quite separate chapters with very different environmental requirements, that the proposed harvesting will be taking place in accordance with a property vegetation plan agreed with DECA, and that this council has adopted a position paper on native timber harvesting in East Gippsland, which states that East Gippsland Shire Council supports a high-quality, low-volume native timber harvesting industry, where our communities can continue to thrive, forests have multiple uses and biodiversity is protected. This position paper was adopted in the light of the decision to end timber harvesting from public land, and hence this objective can only be met from private land. The property vegetation plan in particular needs to be considered carefully by Council, as it is at the heart of the planning application. This plan has been in preparation since 2019 and has had active input from DECA staff over the last 2 years. It's now been agreed with DECA and will be registered on title to the land under Section 69 of the Conservation Forests and Lands Act. This will mean that the PVP will be binding on future owners of the land and that it can be enforced by DECA. So it's not just the code being enforced by Council, but the Section 69 agreement can be enforced by DECA as well. Key features of the PVP are DECA has been heavily involved in its preparation. DECA staff involved included botanical and zoological specialists. The PVP responds to extensive flora and fauna surveys on the land and makes provisions to DECA's satisfaction for the protection of observed and likely species of conservation significance. The PVP explicitly addresses the requirements of the planning scheme. DECA, this is a very important one, was under no obligation to enter into the agreement. It's done so recognising that it meets the requirements of the state government for native forest harvesting on private land. As party to the PVP and with enforcement rights under the Act, it is DECA's intention to take responsibility for the enforcement of not just the PVP, but by extension, the code as well. Several objectors have raised the issue of Shire's ability to enforce the code. We don't accept that view, but the involvement of DECA can mean the issue really does not arise.
Thank you, Mr Williams. I'll ask you to wind up now, please.
That's time?
That's okay. You've got another 15 seconds.
Okay. Finally, let me emphasise the land is private land. There's two entirely different regimes of law for the two land tenures. So I trust Council will approve the application and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr Williams.
Do I take questions or is that it?
No, this is just your
Okay.
opportunity to make a statement to Council. In fact, I'll just seek some governance advice on that. CEO, Council has afforded the opportunity to ask questions of the...
Questions of clarification.
Questions of clarification?
Not questions around...
Questions of clarification on the information you have presented. So, Councillors, I'm happy to afford you the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the Speaker, Mr Williams, tonight. Councillor Allen, please go ahead.
I just wonder if you could expand a bit more on this Section 69 agreement. What's it actually mean?
Okay, Section 69 agreements are called, in the Act, Land Management Cooperative Agreements. They're agreements where the DECA enters into that agreement with the landowner to provide some kind of environmental or public service, and there's a quid pro quo. So in this case, the agreement is for the regeneration and management of the forest and to allow DECA to inspect and to enforce the regeneration and management, and the quid pro quo is that the timber harvesting can take place. They're registered on title, which is probably the key thing. So that's it. So like Section 173, they go on title and can be enforced against the landowner.
Councillor Buckley, you have a question of clarification of the Speaker?
Yes, thank
Please
you.
go ahead.
And thank you very much for that information. It's quite important. So my question is around the variable retention harvesting. There seems to be a little bit of concern about the ambiguous meaning of that, and I don't understand completely what retention harvesting techniques are comparative to you know, select falling methods.
Okay, so yeah, clear felling is obvious. I don't think I need to expand on what that is. And then the alternative at the other end of the spectrum is a selective harvest, where you come through and extract a number of trees that are probably the biggest and the most valuable, but you're not aiming to regenerate the forest. So the variable retention is intending to compromise between the environmental values but also allowing the forest to regenerate. So it's taking the forest as you find it. If there's a clump of young regeneration, that'll probably be left intact, whereas if there's a group of mature trees, then the bulk of them will probably be removed in order that the forest can be regenerated and a new crop can be established. So it is, I guess it's easy to say, well, it's undefined, because it does take the forest as you find it. It's not something you say, we will leave 300 stems per hectare, we will space, 8 metres between trees, we will do this, we will do that, because it is specific to the forest in each clump. But it is leaving more trees, it's leaving clumps of trees, it's regenerating parts of the forest and thinning or not harvesting at all parts of the forest, but it is very contextual.
Thank you.
Councillor, is there any further questions of clarification before we move on? No? Thank you, Mr Williams.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
So, Councillor, that does bring us to planning permit application 5/2023 350.1, timber harvesting and regeneration on private land at 959 Murrungowar Road, Cabbage Tree Creek. And I believe, Mr Stevenson, you're going to lead us through this one. Thank you. Please take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report seeking to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit for timber harvesting and regeneration on private land, 959 Murrungowar Road, Cabbage Tree Creek. In accordance with the Planning Delegations Policy 2023, the application is reported to Council for matters of policy consideration. Some key points for consideration are the application has been made subject to notice and 8 public objections were received. The objections are made in relation to environment and biodiversity concerns and are made by representation of several environmental groups and also by individuals. One letter of support was also received by an adjoining landowner and manager of an existing land which has been subject to historical timber harvesting. The application required referral to the Department of Transport and Planning and the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. Both authorities support the grant of the planning permit subject to conditions. The assessment of the application is that it is made in accordance with the guidelines for the destruction, removal, lopping of native vegetation, DELP 2017, and therefore the proposal is consistent with the framework established for native timber harvesting and can be supported. The application is also generally in accordance with the associated planning policy framework, and the concerns of the community are noted, and specifically it is noted that the recommendation includes conditions which direct the permit applicant to undertake due diligence in relation to matters of Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act requirements, which may affect the permit and its implementation. The officer's recommendation is to issue a notice of decision to grant the planning permit, subject to conditions outlined in attachment 1 to the agenda item. The report also presents options for Council's consideration which would deviate from the officer's recommendation. I'd just like to say also present tonight is Martin Richardson, Manager Planning and Development, and Robert Pringle, Coordinator Statutory Planning, to answer any technical questions. And this report is presented for your consideration. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Stevenson. Councillors, do we have any questions of officers in relation to this matter this evening? No, I see none. Councillor Buckley?
Mr Richardson, in your opinion, is there any concerns in regards to this application that could pose a risk to the council in any way or anything of that nature?
Thanks, Councillor Buckley, for your question. Through you, Mayor, it's a fairly broad question. And look, the risks associated with the application have been outlined in the report. With any planning, almost any planning application, there are always matters of concern that need to be addressed, and in this particular one, obviously there are a considerable number of conditions of approval that are recommended in part to mitigate those risks. So conditions imposed both by, or suggested for imposition both by our officers and by DECA, propose to put in place a regime which requires the applicant to meet the various requirements of the property vegetation plan, to provide reports and audits in effect of the activity, and various other matters covered by those conditions. So typically for a planning application, conditions of approval are placed there to deal with any matters that might need to be followed up and that need to be enforced through the permit. In relation to the other risks, I guess, of a legal nature, again, any decision of council made under the Planning and Environment Act is subject to review, and therefore the legal risks that apply are somewhat minimal. That is that there is an opportunity for review of the application to VCAT, so either objectors in the case of an approval or the applicant in the case of a refusal has the opportunity to go to VCAT for independent review. The council will still need to defend its position in that case, but it does provide an opportunity for greater transparency in the decision and also for that review by an independent umpire. So in our view, the risks are suitably mitigated, both by the application of conditions in the event an approval is issued, but also by the follow-up processes that the Act provides for review by VCAT if necessary.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley, for the question. Councillor White, did you have a question? Or? Oh, okay. Sorry. No, well, I'll go to questions first, and then I'll call for a motion when we've exhausted the questions. So I'm not sure who was next. I think I'll go to Councillor Reeves, then Yuri, then Greason. Thank you. Please go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening again, everyone. I've got two quick questions. I note the objections have been sort of categorised around environmental and biodiversity concerns. And my question is, are these defendable planning considerations? And the second question is, how does this decision, if resolved, sit with the state native timber policy? And is that a concern we should have around this table?
Thanks, Councillor Reeves, and again through you, Mayor. In relation to the first part of the question, certainly environmental and biodiversity considerations are valid and relevant planning considerations. And as was mentioned in the presentation, there are various sections of the planning scheme in relation to policy matters that refer directly to biodiversity and conservation matters. So they are indeed relevant planning matters and obviously central to the consideration of this application. In relation to the state's policy, and there is commentary in the report on that, the state government's policy decision in relation to the closure of the native timber harvesting industry on public land is just that, it relates to public land. Had the state government wished to close down the timber industry entirely in Victoria, it would have made amendments to the Planning and Environment Act and to planning schemes across the state, but it didn't do so. So the planning scheme as it stands, which by and large is a product of state government policy, continues to maintain those provisions that enable the issue of permits for native timber harvesting on private land.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. We'll go to you next. Thank you, Councillor Yuri. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I was also going to ask a question about the state context, so thank you. I think you've covered those things in answer to the previous question. My other question was around the monitoring of this project, should it go ahead. And obviously the task of monitoring is of concern to a lot of people, as we've heard in the objections, also to myself. I'm wondering, that section 69 agreement which Mr Williams referred to, would that be a possibility to add to any permit that was issued, and what difference would it make to council's responsibility for monitoring, in your view?
Thanks, Councillor Uri, and through you, Mayor. So in fact, the property vegetation plan becomes part of the permit. So DECA has, as a recommending authority, has provided us recommended conditions to be applied to the permit, and those include reference to the property vegetation plan. The DECA advice, in fact, was that a revised property vegetation plan needed to be submitted. There were a couple of relatively minor matters that needed to be updated in the property vegetation plan. But the conditions that are included in the proposed recommendation and provided by DECA do refer directly to the enforcement of that property vegetation plan. So, and then the backup to that, in effect, is that the property vegetation plan is enforceable by being placed on the title to the property. So, both through the planning permit enforcement process, because of the conditions that have been proposed to be imposed, and also by virtue of the statutory nature of a property vegetation plan, then both council and DECA are in a position to enforce the requirements of that plan.
So would they go and produce a report every 6 months, as we were proposing in the conditions? DECA, I mean, also to ensure the PVC was being adhered to?
Thanks, Councillor. Through you, Mayor. Not necessarily. However, the condition that we have recommended to be imposed requires an independent report to be provided on reporting on monitoring of compliance. And as that report is provided on a 6-monthly interval, we would propose that the report would be provided to DECA, and we would seek their advice as to the robustness of that report and any concerns that they might have.
Okay. They don't provide the personnel, DECA?
I don't imagine that DECA would necessarily be on the site monitoring activity, but the opportunity exists through Condition 3 as proposed for a report to be provided and for DECA then to review that report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Councillor Greason, please go ahead.
If there are no other questions, Mayor.
Well, we'll just see if are there further questions, councillors? No, I see none.
I'd like to put an alternate motion.
Yes, okay.
I'd like to put a motion of no determination, which is option 3 that Mr Stevenson referred to. That Council receives and notes this report and all attachments pertaining to this report, being the responsible authority and having considered all the relevant planning matters, notes that the proposal is of a nature that is contentious in relation to the interpretation of policy within the East Gippsland planning scheme. Thank you. It's up on the screen now, that appears to be in conflict with other areas of state policy external to the Planning and Environment Act 1987. In accordance with section 97C, a decision is not made and the responsible authority requests that Minister for Planning determine the application. If the Minister agrees to the request in accordance with section 97C, directs that officers provide to the Minister all relevant information with respect to the application, and if the Minister does not agree to the request, directs that officers provide a further report to Council for consideration and determination of the application.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Do we have a seconder for that motion, councillors? Councillor Uri. Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, just to say...
The motion to be put.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'll just seek some governance advice on that. Are we allowed to see the motion put before it's been spoken to? I don't think so. I think the mover has to speak to a motion first.
Okay, apologies.
Can I just also clarify before we move on that the seconder is afforded an opportunity to speak to the motion before the motion is put? And then, as Councillor Buckley has moved a procedural motion, that after the seconder has spoken, the motion to put the motion is then debated and voted on. Have I got that right? Yep. Thank you very much.
May I seek a further clarification?
You can.
Right. So, because we didn't get in quick enough to put the original motion, so if this one's defeated, Then we go back to the original motion.
That is correct.
Right.
The officer there isn't an original motion at this stage. There is an officer recommendation in the report.
Yes.
We have a motion that's been moved and seconded.
Yes.
So
Yep.
once that has been spoken to and debated, if it's defeated, there isn't a motion, and I will call for another motion, at which point anybody is free to move a different motion. Does that make sense?
We might just seek a little more clarification from governance, because I think because there is an officer recommendation, it's slightly different in this response. So
that's right. Yeah, we go back to the officer recommendation. If this
Okay,
one is
so we
defeated.
do have
Yep.
because we have an officer recommendation.
if
That
this one is
is-
lost,
If this one is
If
lost.
this one is lost, that becomes, or is the substantive motion, but it hasn't been moved. So it would then need a mover. So I'll call for the officer recommendation to be moved. Is that correct?
That is correct, because it remains
Okay.
at the moment
Can
a
we
recommendation.
move on?
Very
with
good,
this,
no
please?
worries. Councillor Greason,
Yeah,
please speak to the
thank
motion.
Thank you. Look, whilst I acknowledge the proponent's application, and I consider that the conditions recommended by the council officers to be appropriate, I think the option to refer to the minister makes sense given the government's decision to end native forest logging. It will help council through the planning minister making a determination that will assist council in future decisions relating to applications for native forest logging on private property. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I do agree that this is a contentious decision, but I support the motion that is before us because I think it puts council in a difficult position to approve this motion. The things that worry me particularly are things that have been raised specifically by the objectors also. The methodology worries me, although I'm not an expert in this. I'm told that variable retention harvesting in the past, when it has occurred, leaves a pretty devastating result. And we've heard that it is a contextual thing, so it depends on the proponent how they respond to different ages and collections of trees on the property. So I think there's little guarantee that we'll end up with a result that supports endangered species, and those have been listed by the objectors, and also their environments. I think there's a risk that we won't end up with a good result there. I think, unfortunately, it seems there's a bit of a policy void around native forest logging on private property, so we're sort of without the normal guidance and structures that we could rely on to get a good result. And finally, we have had a number of objectors to this proposal, and some of those individuals I don't know, but I respect the views of a number of people that have written to us. And so I think this is the best outcome that we can achieve in this particular instance. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Councillor Stowe, please go ahead.
Look, I find the whole thing a cop-out, to be quite honest with you.
Sorry.
No, I rescind my previous, I rescind my previous motion for it
Call
to
for it to be put?
I
Okay.
call, yeah.
You can do that, I believe. Please go ahead, Councillor Stowe.
I find referring to the minister is just a cop-out by us. This meets our own position paper. It meets it perfectly. Now, we're the people who did that paper. Now we need to support it. And there's no reason not to support this. It's basically supported by all the various agencies. It's supported by our officers. It's got all the the environmental considerations like buffer zones, fire issues. There's no old growth forest. It's as far as I'm concerned, it's an open and shut case. If we can't approve this, we're never going to approve anything in the forest. I think you should stand up and make yourself counted tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Stowe. Councillors, anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Allen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, originally I would have supported this motion, but thanks to the submission earlier on from, and I asked a question about the Section 69 agreement. That took away my concern, which was how were the conditions that imposed on the permit going to be enforced. And from what I understand, Decca's entered into an agreement that is the same as a sections, what are they, Martin, that we love so much?
173, I believe.
Those ones, exactly the same effect. So with that comfort, I will support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillors, anybody else?
You oppose the motion.
Yeah, you know what I meant.
Okay, it's how you vote that counts, so just make sure you get that part right. Councillor White.
Thank you, Mayor. I would refer to the retention logging scenario, and there's been various examples of how this has worked out, but the presenter has actually told us exactly what their idea of retention logging is, and for this permit, particularly with the possible controversy, they would be crazy to leave it like a clear-felled environment. I'm sure that they will select the logs and they will do a good job and they will protect the environment, and that particular property will be regenerated as it has been before. So I will not support this motion either.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Reeves, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, councillors. I'll support the motions on the table for the reason around planning process. My concern around either resolving to for the recommendation from the officers or refusing it is the appeal process through VCAT. And my understanding is that if it's referred to the planning minister and the planning minister makes a decision, then it secures that decision one way or the other. And I'll look forward to hearing what that decision is. And if it's referred back to us, then that'll strengthen our position in future.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Buckley.
I'll speak against the motion. You know, responsible timber harvesting plays a crucial role in preserving biodiversity. By adopting sustainable practices such as selective logging, but in this case, they've chosen a different method I'm not completely familiar with. However, I agree with Councillor White's sentiment. This is setting a precedent for this private logging harvesting, which also serves a very important fire mitigation to keeping our communities safe, and it also helps support our communities. I can't support fobbing off our responsibility to a minister who doesn't live in our region, who is not suffering under the state's decisions that have affected our communities and our people.
Just to clarify, it will be a planning panel decision?
Well, yes, thank you, Mayor, for that. However, I'm not sure who's going to be sitting on that planning panel, and I know right now that the people around this table who live in our community, who have to see the effects of what the closure of the timber industry has done to our communities and our small towns, are counting on us sitting around this table to make the right decision, for their children and to keep them in our region. Their skills mean something to me. So I'm going to not support fobbing off our responsibility, which is what is being asked with this motion, and I'm hoping that you will support our community and bring it back to the original motion so that we can discuss what it really means, and I've got a bit to say on that. So I will certainly be opposing this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Greeson, I believe as the mover you have a right of reply.
Thank you. I think the councillors' comments have made it quite clear that it is contentious. I think it's really important that we get this right. There's a lot of land that's privately owned that's got native forest on it. We need to know what the planning minister is going to recommend. We need to be able to go ahead with this with confidence, and I think that's what this alternate motion is asking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. I'll just make a brief comment that it's my understanding that the motion before us isn't a fob. I don't believe it's a fob. I think what it's doing is actually seeking further clarification from a higher authority, essentially. If this motion was to be defeated tonight, it would probably be appealed in VCAT. If it was to be approved tonight, it would probably be appealed in VCAT. That is we'd be looking at, I don't know, 6 months, a year, legal costs on both sides. I don't think that's a pathway that is in the best interests of the applicant or the council, and I believe that having a determination made by a state planning panel, which would be final, is in the interest of everybody. So that's how I will be voting. But I'd now like to put the motion to the vote. So all those in favour? And those against? And I believe the motion is carried.
I'll be excused, Mayor. Excuse me.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to agenda item 5.1.2, which is amended development plan for 19 Lomandra Boulevard, Lucknow. Sure. Thank you, Councillor Stowe. You've declared a conflict of interest. Thank you, members of the gallery. I'll just afford you a moment to leave tonight. Thanks for your participation. No. You're absolutely allowed to stay. People have chosen to leave now because they were here for their interest in the previous matters for consideration. And Councillor Stowe has left because he has a conflict of interest in this matter. So it may be appropriate that we close the doors. I'm not sure where Councillor Stowe is, but no, we won't be closing the doors. Okay, thanks everybody for your patience. We'll now move on to 5.1.2, which is an amended development plan for 19 Lomandra Boulevard, Lucknow. And I believe Chris Stevenson, this sits with you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report on an amended development plan for 19 Lomandra Boulevard, Lucknow at the Brookfield Lakes residential estate. The purpose of the proposed amendment is to change the use of a section of the residential estate from a conventional residential subdivision to a residential village. The officer's recommendation is to refuse the proposed amendment based on the business and construction model which relies on unregistered movable dwellings. However, information provided by the applicant late last week suggests that there may be an opportunity to reconsider the matter if the dwellings are subject to building permits to ensure appropriate design and energy efficiency requirements. The key points of the report for council to consider are the existing development plan proposes conventional residential development. The amended development plan has been the subject of 2 separate community consultation processes, and there is significant community objection to the use of the land for a residential village. Issues have been raised relating to quality of buildings, impact of amenity, character, housing density and traffic implications. In principle, the use of the development of the land for a residential village is considered appropriate as it results in greater housing choice and diversity at a location which has appropriate services and infrastructure. However, the type of housing fails to meet objectives for well-designed and energy-efficient residential development. In light of the information provided by the applicant last week, including a proposal to obtain building permits for the dwellings, there is an opportunity for the decision to be deferred for future consideration by Council to enable a further assessment of the quality and environmental performance of the dwellings. Also present this evening is Martin Richardson, Manager of Planning and Development, and this report is presented for your consideration. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Stevens. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Uri, please go ahead.
Thank you. We heard that there was a possibility of deferral of this matter. Mr Richardson, could you please explain what the process would be and what advantage that course of action would have? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Uri, and through you, Mayor. So this is an application to amend a development plan, and therefore the decisions, they're all important. The decision is important, particularly from a community point of view, because if the amendment to the development plan is approved, then there is no opportunity for objection to a subsequent planning permit. So, in light of particularly of the community concerns, but also officer concerns in relation to housing design and quality, that was our original recommendation, was for refusal. The information that's come to light late last week does really get to the heart of that problem, and we believe there's a sincere offer on the table from the applicant to address those concerns. If and when we receive detailed information about building quality, design, materials, separation, etc., then we would reconsider the potential for the application to be approved with conditions that lock in those requirements. If that is the case and that information is provided, we have told the proponent that we would provide that information to the objectors. So whilst the sort of form of objection or the process for objection to a development plan is a little different to that for a planning permit, because it doesn't convey rights of appeal to VCAT, we believe it would be important that if this information is provided, that before the matter is brought back to council, we would provide the objectors with that information, with the intent that any objectors could make comment on whether or not that satisfies their concerns. But at the very least, it would provide the opportunity for council to be open and transparent and to provide the objectors with the information prior to making a decision. We would do that. Objectors may wish to provide further comment, but then we would seek to, assuming that the information satisfies us, we would seek to then draft appropriate conditions that could go with a report that would come back to council.
Thank you. So just to be clear, the deferral relates to the decision about whether this should be approved or not, rather than deferring. A deferral would ask for the thing to come back to council, probably the new council, for consideration and then approval. It doesn't relate to an approval itself.
Thank you, Councillor Uri, and through you, Mayor. Yes, that's correct, and we have provided council with the opportunity to choose that other option of an alternative motion to defer, and the wording of that option would simply be that it defers consideration of the amendment and therefore leaves the matter open for council to make any decision in the future. It doesn't imply a future decision of any kind. It simply means that would mean that the council has deferred its consideration of the application.
Thank you. I just have two other questions.
Yes,
Sorry.
please go ahead.
Thank you. I read in the report that the CFA had not yet responded. They were a referral authority, I believe, but we hadn't had a response from them.
Thanks, Councillor Uri, and through you, Mayor, that's correct. And again, the processes for referral of development plan applications are not set by legislation, they're set by council policy, so a slightly different arrangement. However, given that a residential village needs to comply with the Residential Tenancies Act and the Caravan and Camping Regulations, the CFA is required eventually to provide comment in relation to, and in fact provide formal approvals for the buildings within a residential village. So it's not such a matter of concern that there's been no CFA response at this point. If it does get to the point where officers recommend and council adopts a proposal to approve the application, then the CFA is required under the Residential Tenancies Act to provide information and requirements in relation to fire safety.
Terrific, thank you. My final question is a little bit, might be a bit out there, but recently in the media there's been some reports that some developments, perhaps residential villages, have not treated their residents very well, in that there are some deposits that people have made on their houses and they don't get them back, or there's a big delay. Do we have any control at all over that aspect of a residential village?
Thanks, Councillor. Through you, Mayor. Not strictly speaking, the matters of contractual arrangements between the owner of a residential village and its tenants are up to them. However, I do note that again, in the proposed alternative that we've provided, we have asked the applicant to provide details about the community rules and site agreements and the registration and compliance under the Residential Tenancies Act. So whilst we might not, strictly speaking, have the ability to control that, we have asked the applicant to provide us with some information and undertakings about how they will manage the village.
Great. Thank you, Mr Richardson. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Councillors, are there any further questions? Mr White, please go ahead. John.
That'll do. Martin, you mentioned that this proposal can't go to VCAT by either party. Is that what you said?
Almost correct, Councillor White, through your Mayor. The interesting thing about a development plan is that there is no right of appeal by third parties, by objectors. But if the council were to refuse the application, then the applicant can appeal to VCAT under a tricky little piece of legislation that relates to what's called satisfaction matters. It's not a permit, but any matter where that is to be undertaken to the satisfaction of the council is appealable by an applicant, not objectors. So strictly speaking, if the application were refused, then the applicant could take us to VCAT, but not the objectors.
All right, thanks for that clarification. Now, the other thing is you've mentioned that the applicant has come back with some desirable proposals. Would that then go before it came back to council and you've made a new decision, if you do, would that go back to the objectors also for discussion with them to see if it appeases their complaints?
Yes, thanks, Councillor White. Through you, Mayor, yes, our intention would be, and we already have had a written response from the applicant, but we're proposing in this alternative that we seek some further information, and we would certainly propose to provide all of that information to the objectors so that they could see what response the applicant has provided to the concerns. And I would suggest that even we would go further in that we would perhaps provide the opportunity. We had a planning consultation meeting for this some time ago, but with the changing circumstances, we would even perhaps seek to convene a discussion, a face-to-face discussion with objectors who might wish to discuss it with us and potentially with the applicant. I will note that the discussion we had with the applicant last Thursday indicated that there is a new development manager for this company who wasn't around when we had the previous planning consultation meeting, and we are confident that that person will engage in a discussion with the objectors if we ask them to.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillors, are there any further questions of officers in relation to this matter, Lomandra Boulevard? Councillor Van Diggle, please go ahead.
I just have two questions. The first one is, I'm guessing if we did defer it, it wouldn't come back in our council term. You're not expecting it's going to happen in the next fortnight?
Thanks, Councillor Van Diggle. And through you, Mayor, I do not expect that this would come back within the current council term. We would be rushing it too quickly to get it to the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks. And therefore, we would also be, I'm pretty confident we might be in breach of the election period requirements if we brought a matter of this back to council during the election period, because it is a matter of significant public interest with over 100 objections. And that therefore leaves us probably with no option but to come back to the new council with the revised information in December at the earliest. We have advised the applicant of that and they seem comfortable with that.
Okay, perfect. I guess my other question, which is probably more related, with a residential village, can you just explain to me exactly what that actually means? Because in my head it means over 55s. In this case, I didn't see anything about that. Why is it referred to as a residential village? What are like the parameters around that?
Thanks, Councillor Van Diggle, and through you, Mayor, I wish I could explain exactly what it is. It's quite complicated. I'll do my best. So a residential village is a defined term within the planning scheme, and it's a collection, in effect, a collection of dwellings under the ownership of one party, whereby the dwellings are leased to the occupants. So in a residential village, you own the dwelling, but you don't own the land. So the land is maintained in single ownership, but the occupants of the dwellings sign up a contractual arrangement to own a dwelling on land which is leased. Residential villages are also, by definition, require a certain community facilities. So there's reference made in the definition to community facilities. They might be club rooms or sports facilities or whatever the case might be. So that is it's a defined term within the planning scheme. And then of interest, sometimes causes some confusion for people, is that a residential village is then covered by the Residential Tenancies Act and by the caravan and camping regulations. That doesn't mean it's a caravan park, but it is simply covered for regulatory purposes by those regulations which set minimum standards in relation to fire, wastewater disposal, those kinds of issues.
Thank you. That clarified a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. Councillor, is there any further questions of officers? I believe there are a range of options. Do we have a motion? Councillor Greason?
May I ask, I'm supporting the alternative motion.
So you are moving the alternative motion?
I'm moving the alternative motion. Fine, thank you.
Please go ahead.
Which is the Council receives and notes this report and all attachments pertaining to this report, defers consideration of the proposed amendment of the development plan for 19 Lomandra Boulevard, Lucknow, as amended 19th of April 2024, as provided in attachment 1 to a later Council meeting. Notes that the purpose of the deferral is to obtain further information to satisfy the concerns outlined in the officer's report regarding housing quality and environmental performance, and authorises council officers to request further information from the applicant regarding plans and elevations of proposed dwellings, compliance with building standards for Class 1 dwellings, including energy efficiency, separation between dwellings and the site layout of dwellings, building materials and structural engineering requirements for footings, foundations and connections to services. Mechanisms to bind the applicant to obtaining building permits for each dwelling, and specific details of Residential Tenancies Act registration and compliance, ongoing site management and obligations with future tenants, and draft community rules and site agreements.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. And Councillor Allen, you'd like to second that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion?
Oh no, I'm reassured by officers that this is the appropriate way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Councillor Allen?
Look, I sat here 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 months ago, I can't remember how long ago, and heard from that over 100 objectors to this proposal. But at the same time, we keep hearing of the shortage of housing and the in a particular price band. And I think that this proposal can be changed and can meet the objectors' concerns and can provide a substantial amount of housing in an affordable price range. So I think it's the right thing to do, to go back to them and give them a chance to meet people's concerns and to get this built.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Uri, please go ahead.
Thank you. I support Councillor Allen's comments that he made. I think this is the best way to get a good outcome, and we all know that this has been a very long process which has required a lot of patience from our officers. So thank you very much for all that work. I think, and I look forward to a really good outcome. So just as well as those obvious benefits, I think we hopefully will end up with good housing, quality housing stock, and I think that's incredibly important too in this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Councillors, would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No, in which case I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And I believe that is carried unanimously in the absence of Councillor Stowe. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to agenda item. I will just get Councillor Stowe back in the room and move on to agenda item 5.1.3, which is our submission to Plan for Victoria, which I believe sits with Chris, again. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report outlining a proposed submission to the Victorian Government's plan for Victoria. The officer's recommendation is that the Council endorses the draft submission and authorises the Chief Executive Officer to lodge the submission to the Department of Transport and Planning. Key points for consideration are the Victorian Government is seeking input on its proposed plan for Victoria, which was announced in late 2023 as part of the Government's housing statement. Over the past several months, council officers have been involved in various forums initiated by the Department of Transport and Planning at a state and regional level, including discussions with our colleagues in other Gippsland councils through One Gippsland. The draft submission presented to council seeks to highlight the strength and opportunities that East Gippsland has to offer the state and offers the state and suggests that the plan for Victoria should reflect and build on regional strengths to deliver a meaningful direction for East Gippsland and regional Victoria. Importantly, the submission highlights three key matters for the government to consider. One, that the plan should recognise the significant differences between regional and metropolitan areas in Victoria. Two, that the plan should adopt an integrated approach to planning that considers not only land use and development, but also integrated transport planning, infrastructure investment, planning and delivery of health and education services, and support for regional investment in industry and employment, and the need for reform of the planning system, infrastructure, funding and delivery mechanisms, and the financial sustainability of local government, including constraints on the financial capacity of local government to plan and manage future growth. The draft submission also recommends that a draft plan for Victoria should be released for further feedback to enable all Victorians to comment on it before it is adopted by the state government. Also present is Martin Richardson, Manager of Planning and Development. The report is presented for your consideration. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to this matter? Councillor Buckley, please go ahead.
Who's going to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from?
Councillor Buckley, thanks for the question. Through you, Mayor, pay for the plan or pay for its implementation, or both? Just for clarification.
Well, we can all have great plans, but more for the implementation.
Yeah, thank you. And that in fact forms a significant part of the submission that we've made, and in particular submissions that have been made by the Municipal Association of Victoria and the Planning Institute, is that it's all very well to have a plan, but you need to have an implementation plan as well. And so throughout the submission we've identified the fact that whilst the aspirations for the future of Victoria are good, it needs to be backed up with implementation, and thus we have highlighted matters relating to infrastructure funding, reform of the planning system and various other matters that are about implementation, not just having a plan, and that really forms part of the central focus of the submission that's been made. Our expectation is that the state government will pay for the implementation of its own plan, but equally ourselves and the other local government stakeholders have indicated that the government should be working in partnership with local government to make sure that it's the right plan.
Thanks, that'd be a good start, wouldn't it?
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillors, are there any further questions of officers? Councillor Greason, please go ahead.
Thank you. Look, the submission's terrific. It's a fantastic wish list. And I'm just wondering, have you had an opportunity to talk to other councils other rural councils about whether they're doing the same kind of thing? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Greason. Through you, Mayor. Yes, so some of the forums that we've had, both that have been facilitated by the department in the region, but also assisted through facilitation of the One Gippsland group, have allowed myself and my other colleagues in the planning managers and some CEOs across Gippsland to discuss common themes. And we in fact came up with a set of common themes that we agreed would be part of a Gippsland-wide submission. And they relate back to some of the key matters that we've identified here. I have also had the opportunity of being shared confidentially with the submissions prepared in draft form by other councils, in particular Shire. And there are common themes that we have taken on board that indicated as well. And For all Gippsland councils and for many of the regional councils that have been involved in those forums, the key issues are regional Victoria and Metro Victoria are not the same. Even across the regions, we're not the same. And particular issues about management of growth, that is the capacity of regional councils to support financially, to support the infrastructure needed to manage growth, and in particular to deal with issues to do with medical facilities, education facilities and transport. And I think the common theme has been it's all very well to talk about growth in metropolitan Melbourne, but growth in regional Victoria is a very different beast, and we are lagging in terms of the funding that's required to support that growth.
Yeah, look, thank you for that. So this, in effect, could end up being a very powerful advocacy piece for us and rural in general.
Thanks, Councillor. I'm not sure if that's a comment or a question, but I will briefly respond to it through you, Mayor. Yes, it could, and in fact we have also drawn on the Council's own advocacy strategy in preparing this submission so that they are aligned. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Martin, for the response. Councillor, is there any further questions? No, there is a recommendation in the report. Councillor Uri, you're happy to move that? And do we have a seconder? Councillor Allen, thank you so much. Councillor Uri, would you like to speak to the motion?
Not really. I think except to say that I think it's a very strong submission. It's a little bit of a different take, I think, on other summaries of our region that we've produced so far, and I think I particularly appreciate the strong distinction between rural and metro. I think that's a really, really strong point to make. So thank you very much for the time and effort in putting it together.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion? No? Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No, in which case I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And I believe that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to agenda item 5.2.1, which is Con 2025-1694 Buchan Recreation Reserve Pavilion. And Mr McConnell, I believe that sits with you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report recommending the award of a contract for construction of a new pavilion at the Buchan Recreation Reserve. Following the 2019-20 Black Summer fires, the redevelopment of the Recreation Reserve was identified as one of the highest community recovery priorities. And it's been a significant journey to get to this point where we're able to recommend to you the awarding of a contract, both in terms of the input that has gone into the design and also into securing the funding to enable this facility to be built. And with that, I'd like to just recognise the very significant input from quite a number of members of the community in Buchan who have worked very hard to bring this to this point, and certainly have worked closely with our staff who have also worked hard to bring it to this point. So, the contract would deliver a new pavilion that will complement the new tennis and netball court area that has been recently and separately awarded by council as a separate contract and is currently under construction. Importantly, the pavilion would be relocated to an area which is less subject to flooding. For those who are aware, the existing pavilion in fact has been impacted by flooding previously and footings undermined and so on. So it is important that we take into account those things. That the pavilion will provide that fit-for-purpose multi-use pavilion. Yes, it's at a recreation reserve and a sports facility, but it's also a very important community meeting place. It is today, the recreation reserve, and this would make it even better. It has all of the things you'd expect in terms of the nature of change rooms and facilities and commercial kitchen and similar to support community activity, not just year-round, but also in this context, specifically to support the community when it's most in need during bushfires and other disasters. So it's a very important facility, and that design has gone into the project. So with that, councillors, you have before you a recommendation. Obviously, again, the tender evaluation report is confidential, and if you want to talk about any of the details of that, we can move into the confidential in camera and do that confidentially, but you have a recommendation in front of you, and officers are quite excited to be at this point and being able to make this recommendation to award the contract to you. I would just like to acknowledge the range of funding that has been brought together for this project from both Emergency Recovery Victoria, Sport and Recreation. You'll recall Council initially allocated some of its LRCI funding, so Commonwealth Government funding, $1.2 million. We needed to swap that out and exchange that for council cash at one point, again stepping in a way to facilitate this project and make sure it can occur, and then also some additional funding from council to cover some of the internal costs, etc. So with that, you have the recommendation. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Mr McConnell, and just to acknowledge the great collaboration that this project is. Councillors, do we have any questions of officers? Councillor Uri, please go ahead.
Thank you. Just in case there is anybody from Buchan watching, I'm just wondering, Mr McConnell, about the old building. What will happen to that? Has that been discussed in the planning for this new one?
Yeah, so I think we're still working through some of those things. In the first instance, it will enable some things to occur at the site while we're still building the new one, which is an important step. So that's something we'll continue to work through with the community. Importantly, there's things like toilets and facilities available in that existing building, given the public toilet space will be demolished in order to fit the new pavilion. So that's the things we're working our way through.
Terrific. Thank you.
Councillor Uri. Councillor Buckley, you have a question?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Mr McConnell, was there earth brought in to build up the site, and was there discussion with the community about the fact that the football oval floods as well, and what's going to happen with that?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Buckley, and through you, Mayor. There is a master plan for the site which sees broader development over time. There's discussion about in due course as part of fulfilling that whole master plan that the oval would be relocated somewhat. That's not part of the currently funded projects. When you look at the site, you'll see that there has been earthworks over the years in terms of creating level spaces and lower tiers, etc. So that's certainly happened over time. And in significant flood events, yes, the oval itself is affected. The intention here is to try and keep the hard infrastructure, like the pavilion, as far away from the flood risk areas as we can, so that they're protected. So yes, the oval will continue to flood, and that's something that to an extent can be managed, and is easier to manage than, say, a pavilion or similar being flooded.
So does that mean, just one supplementary question, does that mean that, because where the layout is, there's no really, that I could see, nowhere else that the football oval could go anyway?
Yeah. So in the master plan, the new pavilion is very roughly, you would describe it as being built closer to the netball courts and the tennis court, including the area that's currently occupied by the change rooms and the public toilets. And the master plan has the oval moving closer to that. So it's not as if it's in a fundamentally different space. It largely covers similar footprint to the oval does currently, but it's moved a few, several tens of metres closer to where the pavilion would be built next to the netball courts.
Thank you, Mr McConnell.
Councillors, are there any further questions of officers? There is a recommendation in the report. Councillor White, thank you for moving that. Seconded Councillor Buckley. Councillor White, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess it's taken a long time to acquit the money through bushfire recovery, etc., that was gifted or deemed to the Shire, and but I appreciate how much effort has gone in by the Buchan community.
Sorry, Councillor White, please accept my apologies. I've made a bit of a faux pas, I believe, in the administration of the process there. If I could first just get you to fill in the blanks for that, and then I'll need to get Councillor Buckley to second that information. Then we can move to you speaking to the motion. My apologies.
I reckon we could do that because we'd hate a faux pas to not get them their pavilion.
Indeed, and without an amount there, it may be difficult to move to construction.
Okay, that count. Just fill in the gaps or read the whole four dot points. I'll go from the top.
Either is fine.
Okay, receives and notes this report and all the attachments pertaining to this report. Accepts the tender submitted by Cadbuilt Constructions Proprietary Limited for CON 2025 1694 construction of Buchan Recreation Reserve Pavilion for the revised tendered lump sum price of $469,597.44, excluding GST, as provided at Appendix 1, be accepted and authorises the Chief Executive Officer or delegate to finalise the terms and to sign the contract in the form proposed, and resolves that confidential attachment 1 to this report and all discussions relating to that attachment remain confidential.
Thank you, Councillor White. And again, apologies for my administrative faux pas there. Councillor Buckley, is that the motion that you would like to second?
Indeed it is.
Excellent.
Indeed it is, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor White, if you'd like to now speak to the motion.
I need to recollect. No, just saying again that it's great that we're able to acquit some more of this bushfire recovery money, because like so many of our remote or more remote areas, they were absolutely devastated by the bushfires. And of course we're 4 years on, actually nearly approaching 5 years on from that terrible event. And well, what I'd say is it gives the opportunity with a new pavilion there to invigorate the cavemen, to keep their footy side up and going, and also to perhaps get Pony Club too, get some more activities going in a lovely new pavilion, fully funded now. And I just say to the Buchan community, well done for your efforts, and I hope you really do get some value out of this, and that at one stage they're not going to be breathless as they run through the barriers to get to the ground to play the game.
Thanks, Councillor White. And Councillor Buckley, would you like to speak to the motion?
Certainly.
Please go ahead.
Councillors, this is a matter of profound importance for our community. The redevelopment of the Buchan Recreation Reserve, this project is not merely about upgrading facilities. It's about revitalising the very heart of this small town after the devastating impact of the 2020 Black Summer fires. My son Tom has for many seasons played football in the past for the Cavemen, for the Buchan Footy Club, and I played Bunnambra netball. That was a long time ago, but I remember it well. And we travelled many miles for the privilege. I'm proud to know that I have many friends in Buchan, and that we are small communities that make up the heart of our region. The Buchan Rec Reserve has long been more than just a sports ground. It's a vital community hub that serves multiple roles adjacent to the Buchan River, and this reserve has been the lifeline for the people during natural disasters. It offers critical staging and refuge for the community. It's a place where local sporting clubs come together, where we eat, laugh and drink lots of beer responsibly, of course, and have parties and celebrations. I won't go on too much about it because I think, John, you did a really good job, but I think the redevelopment project is a significant investment in the town's future, and it fosters a community spirit that supports local sports, and overall it enhances the quality of life. It's amazing to me that in our term, councillors, we've made provision for not only the Buchan community, but for several other sporting facilities, including Ensay, Swiss Creek and Omeo. However, I must take this final opportunity to say I am bitterly disappointed that the Bunnambra Recreation Reserve has not been deemed necessary for provision. So rest assured, I've fought for that to be addressed, yet so far to no avail. It just shows, though, how important these facilities are to the survival of our small communities. So, councillors, the recommendation before us is to accept the tender for the construction of the new pavilion and authorise the finalisation of the contract. I urge you to support it, and because it really is the very fabric of our social and communal life there. The Buchan Recreation Reserve has always been the cornerstone of the community. Its redevelopment is testament to our strength and our dedication to rebuild after adversity. By supporting this project, we're investing in a brighter, more resilient future for Buchan, a future where the community can continue to gather, support one another and create memories. I would like to thank all that have worked on the project, including the general managers and, you know, the community, the people that it means the most to, and support one another in that. And I'd like to see it all happen very quickly. They've been very patient in waiting for this. So I put the motion to the council group. Let's support it.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? I see no hands, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move on to 5.2.2, which is Con 2025-1659, construction of Air Ambulance Victoria Transfers Facility at the Bairnsdale Airport. Mr McConnell, I believe this also rests within your directorate. If you'd like to introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report recommending the award of a contract for construction of patient transfer facility at the Bairnsdale Airport. For use particularly by Air Ambulance Victoria. This is a really important investment for our community. The Bairnsdale Airport is one of the busiest medical transfer airports in Victoria. It's really critical as a community service to our community in that respect. And so currently, if the weather is not good, then the only facility we have there to support transfer of patients who need care is through the public terminal, and doesn't afford people the kinds of privacy, etc., that they deserve. And so it's important that we proceed with this facility. The facility will comprise of a transfer station building, which will allow the transfer and management of patients as they move from road ambulances through into the air ambulance, and provide for that private and controlled environment for that to occur. It provides the medical staff with a dedicated building from which to operate, and provides that comfortable and appropriate environment for them. So in addition to the fully insulated standalone shed, the project also includes significant apron and taxiway access to the front, and also road access to the back of the facility to enable those transfers. And so, councillors, I think it's a really important project. I'd like to just acknowledge, as part of this, the Commonwealth Government's contribution of funding. So this is something in which there is a significant grant from the Commonwealth Government, and that is co-funding the project, or proposed to co-fund the project with council, and so just to recognise that. So, councillors, before you is a report recommending the award of the contract. Again, the tender evaluation panel report is presented as a confidential attachment, and if you have questions, we can go to those, but we'll need to move into confidential to do so.
Thank you, Mr McConnell. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Buckley, please go ahead.
I don't think this requires moving into confidential, but I'm just curious to know or get the information of what council has contributed to this project.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Buckley. So the overall project budget that's been allocated is available is a little over $3 million, of which is 50-50 council and Commonwealth Government. There is some additional contribution that council has made to cover some of the expenses which are ineligible under the grant funding arrangements, etc. But essentially it's a $3 million budget that's been allocated to the project, with 50-50 from both council and the Commonwealth Government.
Substantial, yeah, a very substantial amount of money for council to be putting towards what is a very important facility.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Further questions? Councillor Stowe, please go ahead.
Given that we're largely doing this upgrade for the benefit of the air ambulance and firefighting, what contribution can we expect from them?
Thanks, Councillor Stowe. So this is an upgrade for the benefit of the medical transfer and for the community of East Gippsland. So there is no specific contribution from Air Ambulance Victoria or Ambulance Victoria. But again, the project has significant funding from the Commonwealth Government, which I think is really important in this context. So it's not, yes, the ratepayers of East Gippsland are making a contribution, but so too is the Commonwealth Government, and that's significant.
Thank you, Mr McConnell. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Uri, please go ahead.
Sorry, again, a little bit left of field, but during the community vision consultation in Painesville the other day, an ex-aviator told me that he thought the Bairnsdale Airport was the best regional airport in Victoria, and I believed him. But he did make a comment to say that the seats weren't as comfortable as they used to be, and also the pictures. There used to be some really good historical pictures around the wall, and so I don't know whether, hopefully they'll be found. Perhaps they've been put aside or something, but hopefully they'll come back again. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Uri. I'll take that on notice. The facility that we're proposing here is a separate building from the main terminal, but the main terminal remains important. And he's right. The Bairnsdale Airport is one of the best airports, and I'm not sure how many times it's been awarded accordingly as one of the best regional airports in Australia. So it is recognised in that way.
Very good. Further questions of officers? Councillors? Councillor Reeves, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the report. It's a fantastic opportunity that we've been presented here. My question, I think, doesn't venture into the realm of confidentiality, because the financial discussion is there in the report. If the tendered amount is less than the co-contribution, a double contribution, is council required to stump up 50%, or do we effectively use up the Commonwealth grant first and then delve into our own finances?
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Generally, how these are dealt with is there will be a 50-50 contribution to whatever the project amount is, and then if there is a surplus at the end of that process, that's a conversation that we have with the funding body to see whether there's an appropriate transfer of those dollars, but sometimes there's also a need to return some of those dollars if the project has been fully delivered at a lower cost.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Councillors, any further questions of officers on this matter? Councillor Greason, happy to put the motion. Councillor Buckley, happy to second it. We'll just wait to get those details up first before I get you to do that. Thank you, Councillor Greason. If you could supply those, please.
Thank you. So point 2 is accepts the tender submitted by Middleton Lee Proprietary Limited, trading as CAL Civil for CON 2025-1659, construction of Air Ambulance Victoria Transfer Facility, Bairnsdale Airport, for the tendered lump sum price of $1,754,132.85 ex-GST, as provided in Appendix 1, be accepted.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. And Councillor Buckley, you're happy to confirm and move?
Yes, I am, Mayor.
Very good. And Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, just to say that I think this is a great improvement of services for our community, and it's really quite, whilst ambulance transfer from their bed to an aircraft bed would always have been done with greatest possible privacy and keeping them dry in the rain. It just is a lot more professional to have a proper place to do it in. So well done and thank you.
Councillor Greason. Councillor Buckley.
Well, this is a little bit close to home for me because my father was one of the first air ambulance operators in the district, having flown people in all sorts of forms of aircraft out of the mountains in bad weather conditions. So I think he'd be looking down upon us and me today, very proud that we're doing the right thing by our community and providing this service. So I just wanted to pay respects to my late father. Thank you, Mayor, and support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Happy to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, we'll now move on to agenda item 5.2.3, which is a contract extension and variations. Con 1148, 1314, curb waste recycling, organics, collections, street litter, public place recycling services. Mr McConnell, this sounds like it would sit with you as well, if you'd like to speak to the item, please.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Before you use a report, the Mayor has already read the title, so I won't reread the title, but essentially it's to providing an extension to our existing contractual arrangements that provide one of the most fundamental services that council provides, which is the collection of rubbish. So it's a significant service of council. It's one of the fundamental things that council does. The existing contract was awarded by council at its meeting on the 7th of October back in 2014 for a period of 10 years with an additional 2-year option, which is to commence on the 1st of March. We're bringing next year. We're bringing this report to you early, really given the election period, and also to make sure that both council's operations and also the contractor have certainty about the arrangements for the next period of time rather than leaving it to the last moment. The report recommends that council utilise the option of a 2-year extension on the current 10-year contract term, but also amend the contract by introducing an additional 2-year extension option should this be required. And the reasons for that is really to provide some surety in the event that is required as we step through the current waste review that is ongoing. There are some other minor amendments to capture some of the operational changes in the service which have occurred over the last 10 years, and they have been prepared in consultation with the contractor. So, councillors, I also have with me tonight Nathan, our Manager of Waste Management, Waste Minimisation and Environmental Sustainability, who's here to assist with any additional questions, and the report and the recommendation is presented for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McConnell. Councillors, are there any questions of officers? I see none. Very comprehensive report. There is an officer recommendation in the report. Councillor Allen, happy to move that. And can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stowe, thank you. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. Look, of the three R's of local government, I think rubbish is the one that people confront daily. So I think it's a very, very important part of the work that we do, a very important service to community, and I have no hesitation in moving this motion. I believe that Tambo Waste provide a very, very good service right around the Shire.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Councillor Stowe, would you like to speak to the motion?
Good to see it going to a good local business.
Thank you, Councillor Stowe. Councillors, is the motion opposed? No. Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, look, I just want to support Councillor Allen and Stowe's position on this. I think that we should go local whenever we can, and we have high expectations of having a clean towns and good services. So happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? No, in which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And I believe that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. And I think that moves us on to 5.3.1, which is our hardship policy under the Directorate of Business Excellence. Sarah Johnson, if you'd like to speak to the item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, before you is a report titled Hardship Policy, which is seeking Council's consideration and adoption of the Hardship Policy, which we'll refer to from there on in as the policy, and rescission of the existing financial hardship policy. As you know, rates income is the main source of funding we collect to enable us to build and maintain vital infrastructure and deliver hundreds of services for our community every day. As we start the issuing of rates notices for this year, we're also keenly aware of the cost of living pressures facing our community and want to make sure that we're here to help for those that need it. That's why we've updated the hardship policy. The policy clearly sets out the options of assistance available for anyone who is experiencing hardship and will assist them in managing the payment of their rates and charges. It also applies to everyone, so no matter what property type you have, this policy applies to you. To develop the policy and application process, we've been working with local financial counsellors and rural financial counsellors because we're committed to ensuring that the process of applying for assistance is as easy as possible. What this means is that whether there's an assessment of hardship from another provider, for instance Centrelink, we'll take that at face value and just work with the applicant as to what types of support we can help them with. We've also updated our website to provide an easy reference tool as to the types of support and assistance we can offer. And I wanted to reiterate that even if you're not in hardship, we can help people with payment arrangements, which allows people to make smaller payments across a longer period of time, and that's really important. So even if you're not in hardship, call us and we can help you make those smaller payments over a longer period of time. So it is a very broad brush policy in that sense. Lastly, we're doing further training with our team and our customer service team and our rates team to make sure that we can recognise hardship at the earliest inception point and provide the best confidential support that we can to people who need that. One of the other things that our rates team are doing is getting out and about across the region as rates notices go out, and they'll be able to talk to them about the rates notices and our options that are available to help as part of what this policy is proposing. I would like to take any questions from there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Johnson. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to the hardship policy? Councillor Uri, please go ahead.
Thank you. Ms Johnson, one of the important parts of this policy for me, I think, is the collection of data, not people's personal data, but the data to come back to council to help with deliberations around setting rates and differentials and so on. Could you just reassure me that that won't be, people's personal details won't be recorded and kept?
Thanks, Councillor Uri. It's a really important question, and yes, in line with our privacy and privacy policy that sits outside of this particular one, the reporting will be absolutely at the highest level, so we can help with the decision making around things like differentials, as opposed to people's individual data.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Uri. Any further questions, councillors, in relation to the hardship policy? No? Do we have there? Oh, sorry, Councillor Reeves.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question. In regard to the definitions of hardship and financial hardship, I noted in the report that this is being more clearly defined. And I'm wondering how that benefits both those who find themselves in hardship and us as a council in assisting.
Yeah, look, thanks, Councillor Reeves. It's a really good question. So the definitions of hardship are actually centred around the ministerial guidelines that have been provided for hardship. So there's hardship definition and financial hardship definition. Now, what it means is if you're in financial hardship, you can have access to things like waivers, whereas if you were just defined as in hardship, you would have access to things like deferrals and interest interest waivers and things like that as well. So there's different pathways for people who are defined in the different categories of either hardship or financial hardship.
Very good. Are there any further questions, councillors? Councillor White, we do have a motion. We do have a recommendation. Councillor White, you'd like to move that?
Thank you.
Very
Yes.
good. And do we have a seconder? Councillor Greason. Councillor White, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Sarah, for you and your team's work on this. It's been something that I guess has been needed for some time, and it's more concise and probably offers more assistance than we've been able to give before. I wish that we didn't need this in our community, but sadly, the way things are, I'm sure that there will be a number of people who take up this chance to spread the load on their repayments or get deferrals. As I said, it's really sad that this is where we are, but at least with the work that Sarah and her team have done, we are in a position to give them all the assistance possible under the Local Government Act. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor White. And Councillor Greason, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, look, I'm really pleased with this policy, and thank you for you and the staff and the work that you've put into this. I think the policy and the updated information on the council's website is going to make quite a bit of difference, make it much easier to access support for people who are in financial hardship. And I'm delighted too, because the notion of motion that I put recently, a lot of the concerns that I included in there, obviously you were in the process of adopting them into your policy, so it's great. It's great that the staff are having training and to better understand what it means to be in financial hardship and recognise it, as you say. The fact that they're going to be working closely with financial counsellors, and the suggestion that financial counsellors will come into council offices throughout the region to, to provide so that people can access support that way. It's fantastic. And I think there's a lot of aspects to this policy and the rewrite of this policy that are going to make a significant difference to people who are paying rates, so that they're not at risk of not having sufficient food or accommodation or clothes or those sorts of things. And also the reporting back is going to make it much easier for councillors to make decisions about differential rating in the future. So thank you. I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Greason. Councillor White, do you have a...
I guess this is a little bit not following procedure, but there was one other thing I would have liked to have spoken about. Is that okay?
You can say that right now.
Yes, it's just more about also that what you've added into this, the provision of an intermediary person who can assist these people who, many of them can't quite assist themselves, don't have the technology, but that it all remains confidential, but somebody who knows their way around the system is able to give you information on their behalf. I think that's also very important.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case, I will put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Our next agenda item is urgent business. CEO, do we have any urgent business for consideration this evening? Don't think we do. No?
No, we don't.
Very good. In which case we'll move on to agenda item number 7, which is confidential business. Councillor Allen, I think you are moving a motion in accordance with section 66(2) of the Local Government Act that we move into an in-camera session to consider items 7.1 and 7.2. Is that correct?
Took the words exactly out of my mouth.
Thank you so much for that. And is there a seconder for that motion, please, councillors? Thank you, Councillor Greason. Councillor Allen, would you like to speak to the motion?
No.
Very good. And Councillor Greason. Councillors, is the motion opposed? Would anybody else like to speak for or against the motion? In which case I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That is passed unanimously, and we'll now go into Thank you, everybody, and welcome back to the closing session of tonight's council meeting. And thank you very much, everybody, for your participation this evening, officers for your reports, councillors for your moving and speaking to and against motions. We've had some good debate tonight, and I look forward to our next meeting. Good night, everybody, on behalf of the East Gippsland Shire Council, and have a pleasant and safe evening. And we'll close the meeting at 8:58.
Thank you, Mayor.
Good job.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.
Bye.